They pushed my 8-year-old grandson into the frozen lake and laughed when he went under. I dove in after him without thinking. 20 minutes later, when the paramedics were loading Danny into the ambulance, I made the call that would change everything. Frank, it's Maggie. Do what you have to do. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to how we got to that terrifying moment on Christmas Eve, 2024. My name is Margaret Sullivan, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 67, widowed for 3 years, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. Turns out, I was dead wrong about that. It all started going sideways when my daughter-in-law Brittany decided I was cramping her style. See, Brittany comes from money, the kind of Connecticut old money that makes people think their last name should be printed in gold letters. The Harrington family owns half the businesses in Greenwich and acts like they own the other half too. When she married my son Kevin 5 years ago, I thought love had won over class differences. Another mistake on my long list. Kevin's a good man, works construction, makes decent money, but to the Harringtons, he might as well be wearing overalls to the country club. And me? Well, I'm just the retired nurse from Queens who raised Kevin after his father died in Afghanistan. In Brittany's perfect world, I'm what you might call an embarrassment. The first sign of trouble came last summer when Danny started spending less time with me. Every weekend visit got shorter. Every holiday invitation came with more conditions. Mom, Brittany thinks it might be better if you came later, Kevin would say, his voice tight with stress. After her parents leave, always after someone more important left. But I kept my mouth shut, smiled, and showed up when allowed. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You make yourself smaller so they can feel bigger. At least, that's what I told myself while I watched my relationship with my only grandchild slowly disappear. Then came the Christmas party at the Harrington estate, 20-acre property with a main house that could fit 3 of my apartment buildings. Private lake, tennis court, the works. Brittany had been planning this party for months, inviting all the right people. Politicians, business owners, anyone with enough money to make her feel important. I almost didn't go. Kevin had to beg me, actually. Please, Mom. Danny keeps asking for Grandma Maggie, just for a few hours. So I put on my best dress, the navy blue one I wore to Kevin's wedding, and drove out to Greenwich in my 10-year-old Honda. The valet looked at my car like I'd driven up in a garbage truck. The party was exactly what you'd expect from people who measure their worth in trust fund statements. Crystal chandeliers, servers in white gloves, and enough diamonds to light up Times Square. I found Danny in the corner of the living room, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. 8 years old and already learning that some people matter more than others. Grandma Maggie. He ran to me, and for a moment, everything felt right again. Until Brittany appeared, designer dress probably worth more than my monthly rent, with that smile she reserves for special occasions, the one that never reaches her eyes. Margaret, she said, not quite loud enough for others to hear. I'm so glad you could make it. Danny, sweetie, why don't you go play with your cousins? They're by the lake. She said it like she was being helpful, but I knew better. She wanted Danny away from me before her important guests saw us together. That should have been my first clue about what was coming. Oh, Margaret's here, Brittany's mother announced to the room like someone had just tracked mud on her Persian rug. Victoria Harrington has perfected the art of making people feel unwelcome without saying anything directly rude. It's a talent. Really. The conversation around us shifted, the way it does when the hired help walks into a room of paying customers. I've been dealing with people like Victoria my entire life. Nurses learn early how to spot the ones who think their money makes them better than everyone else. The difference is, in the hospital, I could walk away when my shift ended. Victoria, I replied with my sweetest smile, lovely to see you again. What I really wanted to say would have gotten me banned from Connecticut, but I'm not stupid. I knew Kevin was watching from across the room, probably holding his breath and praying I wouldn't embarrass him. I was just telling everyone about our winter house in Aspen, Victoria continued, her voice carrying that particular pitch wealthy women use when they want to remind you of your place. Perhaps you know the area? Do you ski, Margaret? Do I ski? Right. On my nurse's pension, I can barely afford cable television. But sure, let me tell you about my winter sports activities. Not really my thing, I said. I prefer activities that don't require trust funds. The silence that followed was deafening. Brittany appeared at her mother's elbow like magic, damage control mode activated. Mother, didn't you want to show the Pembertons your new art acquisition? As Victoria glided away, shooting me a look that could freeze water, Brittany leaned in close. Margaret, could you please try to remember where you are? These people are important to Kevin's future. Important to Kevin's future. Translation. Shut up, Smile, and don't remind anyone that their precious Brittany married beneath her station. Of course, dear, I said. I'll try to contain my working-class charm. Brittany's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, her father Richard joined us. Now, Richard Harrington is what happens when you give a mediocre man unlimited money and no consequences. He runs the family investment firm, which mostly seems to involve playing golf and making other people do the actual work. Margaret, he boomed, loud enough for half the room to hear. How's that little apartment working out for you? Kevin mentioned you downsized after your husband passed. I downsized because Kevin and Brittany needed help with their mortgage, but I wasn't about to share that information with Richard. Some family business should stay private, even when you're dealing with people who wouldn't understand privacy if it came with an instruction manual. It's perfect for me, I replied. Closer to my book club and the community center where I volunteer. Volunteer work? Richard nodded sagely, like he'd just discovered a fascinating new concept. How generous of you to give your time like that. Of course, some people have time to spare. Some people have time to spare, because clearly my life was so meaningless that volunteer work was just how I filled my empty days. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood and excused myself to find Danny. I found him outside by the lake with Brittany's nephews, 3 boys who'd inherited the family talent for casual cruelty. The lake was frozen solid, had been for weeks according to Kevin, but Danny was standing well back from the edge while the other boys threw rocks at the ice. Come on, Danny, one of them called. Don't be such a baby. The ice is thick enough to walk on. Danny shook his head, staying where he was. Good boy. I taught him to be careful around water, told him stories about thin ice and hidden currents. His father never learned to swim properly, too busy working to pay for lessons, but I'd made sure Danny knew the dangers. Grandma Maggie! Danny spotted me and ran over, relief clear on his face. They want me to go on the ice, but you said never to trust frozen lakes. That's right, sweetheart. I ruffled his hair, noting how the other boys had stopped their game to stare at us. 3 little hedge fund princes in their designer winter coats, already learning that rules were for other people. The oldest one, probably around 10, stepped forward. Are you really Kevin's mother? You don't look anything like him. Kids say things like that. They don't mean harm, usually. But when you add in the attitude these particular kids had been raised with, innocent questions become something else entirely. I am, I said simply. But you're so old, and your clothes are weird. Brandon, Danny said quietly. That's my grandma. I know who she is, Brandon shot back. My mom says she used to empty bedpans for a living. That's when I saw the flash of shame cross Danny's face. 8 years old, and already learning to be embarrassed by his own family. Already starting to measure his worth against his cousin's trust funds and private school educations. Your mother's right, I told Brandon calmly. I was a nurse for 37 years. I took care of people when they were scared and hurting. What does your mother do for work? Brandon looked confused, like the question had never occurred to him. She doesn't work. She doesn't have to. How lucky for her. I put my arm around Danny's shoulders. Come on, sweetheart. Let's go get some hot chocolate. As we walked back toward the house, I could hear Brandon telling the other boys that Danny's grandmother was just a nurse. Like it was some kind of disease, the way kids do when they're repeating things they've heard adults say. That's when I knew tonight was going to end badly. The hot chocolate station was set up near the library, far enough from the main party that I could actually hear myself think. Danny clutched his mug with both hands, stealing glances toward the windows where his cousins were still playing by the lake. Grandma Maggie, he said quietly. What's a bedpan? My heart clenched. It's something nurses use to help patients who can't get out of bed. Nothing shameful about it, sweetheart. Taking care of people is important work. But Brandon made it sound. Brandon doesn't know any better, I said, though we both knew that wasn't exactly true. Brandon knew exactly what he was doing. Children are incredibly good at picking up on adult attitudes, especially the ugly ones. Kevin appeared in the doorway, looking frazzled. Mom, there you are. Brittany's looking for Danny. Something about a family photo. Family photo. Right. The annual Harrington Christmas portrait, where they'd pose Danny with all the other grandchildren and somehow managed to position me just outside the frame. Last year, I'd ended up standing behind a plant like hired help. Can Grandma Maggie be in the picture too? Danny asked hopefully. Kevin and I exchanged glances. We'll see, Kevin said, which is parent speak for, absolutely not, but I'm not brave enough to say so. We made our way back to the main room, where a professional photographer was setting up an elaborate lighting system. The Harringtons don't do anything halfway, including family photos that will probably end up on Christmas cards sent to people they barely know. Brittany was directing the setup like a movie producer, positioning family members with military precision. Grandmother and Grandfather Harrington in the center chairs, of course. Victoria, you stand behind Father's left shoulder. Richard, behind Mother's right. Children in front. She went through the entire extended family, every cousin and aunt and uncle, assigning everyone their proper place in the hierarchy. Kevin got positioned in the back row, next to Brittany's cousin who manages one of the family businesses. Danny was placed in front with the other grandchildren. I stood off to the side, waiting to see if I'd be included, or if this was another one of those immediate family-only situations that somehow always excluded me. "Margaret!" Brittany called out, like she'd just remembered I existed. "Could you help Mrs. Henderson with her coat? She's having trouble with the zipper." Help with coats. That was my role in this family. The help. Not grandmother, not family member, just someone to handle the tasks that were beneath everyone else. I watched the photographer start taking pictures while I fumbled with Mrs. Henderson's zipper, feeling like I was watching my family through a window. "All done," I told Mrs. Henderson, turning back to see if there might still be time for me to join the photo. "Perfect," Brittany announced. "I think we got some beautiful shots. Thank you, everyone." Danny looked around the group, then spotted me, standing alone by the coat rack. "Wait," he called out. "Grandma Maggie wasn't in any pictures." The room went silent. 20 adults and half a dozen children, all staring at the 8-year-old who'd pointed out what everyone else was pretending not to notice. "Oh," Brittany said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. We can take a few more with you included." But the damage was done. The professional setup was being broken down, family members were already starting to wander away, and everyone knew this was charity. The photographer snapped a few quick shots with me, awkwardly inserted into the group. But we all knew these weren't the photos that would end up framed on anyone's mantle. "There," Brittany said brightly. "All set." Danny slipped his hand into mine as the family dispersed. "I'm sorry, Grandma Maggie." "Nothing for you to be sorry about, sweetheart." But I was furious. Not just at Brittany, but at Kevin for standing there watching it happen. At myself for caring so much about being included in their perfect little family portrait. "Can I show you my new video game?" Danny asked, tugging on my hand. "Dad got it for me early for Christmas." Of course. Anything to get away from the fake smiles and designer clothing for a few minutes. We headed upstairs to Danny's temporary room. The Harringtons had set up guest rooms for the out-of-town family members staying over for Christmas. Danny's room was bigger than my entire living room, complete with a gaming setup that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. "Look," Danny said, firing up some racing game. "You can pick any car you want." I settled into the chair next to him, grateful for his easy company. For 20 minutes, we raced digital cars around impossible tracks while Danny explained the various features with the patience of someone who genuinely wanted to share something he loved. "Danny!" Brittany's voice carried up the stairs. "Time to come down. The other children are going to roast marshmallows by the fire. Can Grandma Maggie come too?" Danny called back. A pause. I think she might be more comfortable visiting with the other adults. More comfortable, right. Because clearly I'd rather make small talk with people who treated me like I was invisible than spend time with my own grandson. Danny's face fell, and I could see him starting to understand how these things worked. "You go ahead, sweetheart," I told him. "I should probably head home soon anyway." "But you just got here." "I know." I hugged him tight, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and trying to memorize the feeling of his small arms around my neck. "But sometimes grown-ups have to leave parties early." "Because they don't want us there," Danny said quietly. Out of the mouths of babes. 8 years old, and he already understood what it had taken me decades to admit to myself. I should have left then. Should have kissed Danny goodbye, found Kevin to make my excuses, and driven back to Queens with what was left of my dignity intact. Instead, I made the mistake of stopping in the bathroom before heading out. The powder room was decorated like a magazine spread. Marble countertops, gold fixtures, and hand towels that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I was washing my hands when I heard voices in the hallway outside. Brittany and her sister-in-law, Caroline, having the kind of conversation women have when they think no one's listening. "I just don't understand why Kevin insists on bringing her to everything," Brittany was saying. "It's so awkward for everyone." "She seems nice enough," Caroline replied, though her tone suggested she was just being polite. "Nice isn't the point. Look at tonight. She made that comment about trust funds in front of Mother, then monopolized Danny for half the evening. The poor child barely got to interact with his cousins. Monopolized. I'd spent 20 minutes playing video games with my grandson, and somehow that translated to monopolizing his time. because apparently my relationship with Danny was supposed to be rationed to accommodate Brittany's social calendar. Has Kevin talked to her about scaling back her visits? Caroline asked. I've suggested it, but you know how men are about their mothers. He feels guilty because his father died and she raised him alone. Noble, I suppose, but not very practical. Not very practical. That's what I'd become. An inconvenient reminder of Kevin's life before Brittany upgraded him to her social circle. A problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. What does she do with herself all day anyway? Caroline continued. Kevin mentioned she volunteers somewhere, but it's not like she has a real purpose anymore. No real purpose. 37 years of nursing, raising a son who became a good man despite losing his father, volunteering at the community center where I helped seniors navigate their benefits paperwork. But none of that counted because I didn't have a trust fund or a husband to define my worth. Exactly, Brittany said. That's why this whole thing is so awkward. She doesn't really fit anywhere in our lives, but she keeps trying to insert herself. And Danny's getting old enough to notice how different she is from the rest of the family. Different. Such a polite way to say, beneath us. Maybe if you found her some activities with people her own age, Caroline suggested. Senior groups or something? Give her a sense of community that doesn't revolve around you and Kevin. I've thought about that. There's a lovely senior center in Queens near her apartment, much more appropriate for someone in her situation. Someone in my situation. A poor widow who'd forgotten her place in the natural order of things. I gripped the marble countertop, fighting the urge to march out there and tell them exactly what I thought of their conversation. The thing is, Brittany continued, lowering her voice, I'm concerned about Danny. He's at such an impressionable age, and I don't want him getting confused about family dynamics. The other children have grandparents who fit a certain standard. I want Danny to understand what's expected of him as he grows up. What's expected of him. Translation. Forget where you come from, kid. Pretend your grandmother doesn't exist so you can properly blend in with the trust fund babies. I understand completely, Caroline said. Image matters, especially at Danny's school. The other parents notice everything. They were talking about my grandson's private school education, where appearances mattered more than character and family loyalty was conditional on social status. Suddenly, I understood why Danny had looked so uncomfortable at the party, why he'd been standing apart from his cousins. He was already learning to be ashamed of me. The voices moved away down the hall, but I stayed in the bathroom for another few minutes, staring at my reflection in the gold-framed mirror. 67 years old, gray hair that I'd styled carefully for tonight, wearing my best dress that was probably older than Brittany's marriage. When had I become someone to be hidden away? When had loving my family become an inconvenience they had to manage? I found Kevin in the kitchen, talking quietly with his father-in-law about some construction project. He looked up when I approached, and I could see the question in his eyes. Had I done anything embarrassing while he wasn't watching? I'm heading home, I told him. Already? But you just got here. I've been here for 3 hours. Kevin. Oh. He glanced around, probably calculating how long he'd have to stay to avoid offending anyone important. Drive carefully. The roads might be icy. That was it. No, thank you for coming. No, Danny was so happy to see you. No, when can we get together again? Just drive carefully, like I was any other guest leaving early. I found Danny in the living room, roasting marshmallows with his cousins while the adults stood around drinking wine and talking about their winter vacation plans. He looked up when I approached, his face lighting up for just a moment before falling. You're leaving? It's getting late. Sweetheart. But you're coming to Christmas dinner, right? At our house? I glanced toward Kevin, who was suddenly very interested in his conversation with Richard about interest rates. Brittany appeared at my elbow like she'd been waiting for this moment. About Christmas dinner? She said, with that bright smile that never meant anything good. I hope you don't mind, but we've had to adjust the plan slightly. Kevin's cousin is flying in from California, and with the space constraints, in their 4-bedroom house with the formal dining room that seated 12. I understand, I said, because what else could I say? Maybe we can celebrate another time. Danny's face crumpled. But Grandma Maggie, you always come to Christmas dinner. Plans change, sweetheart. That's okay. But it wasn't okay, and we both knew it. I kissed the top of his head, breathed in the scent of his hair one more time, and walked out of the Harrington estate knowing that something fundamental had shifted. I just didn't realize how much until the next day. Christmas morning dawned gray and bitter cold, the kind of weather that makes you want to stay in bed with a book and a cup of coffee. I'd been awake since 5, staring at the ceiling and trying not to think about Danny opening presents without me for the first time in his life. My phone buzzed around 10, a text from Kevin with photos from their morning. Danny in his pajamas, surrounded by more gifts than most families see in a lifetime. Big smile, but something missing in his eyes. No mention of when I might see him. No invitation to stop by later. I was microwaving leftover Chinese takeout for breakfast when my phone rang. Kevin's name on the display made my heart jump. Maybe he'd realized excluding me was wrong. Maybe they wanted me to come over after all. Merry Christmas, Mom. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. I tried to keep my voice light, normal. How's Danny enjoying his gifts? He's great. Listen, actually, that's why I'm calling. He's been asking about seeing you today, and I was wondering, would you be up for taking him for a few hours this afternoon? Brittany's family is coming over for dinner, and you know how it gets with all the kids running around. So I was good enough to babysit when the real family wanted him out of the way, but not good enough to be included in Christmas dinner. The irony would have been funny if it didn't hurt so much. Of course, I said. I'd love to spend time with Danny. Great. Could you pick him up around 2? Brittany wants to get the house set up before everyone arrives. Brittany wants. The most powerful phrase in Kevin's vocabulary these days. At exactly 2 o'clock, I pulled into their driveway. Kevin met me at the door, already dressed for company in his good slacks and the sweater Brittany had probably picked out for him. Danny's getting his shoes on, he said, not quite meeting my eyes. Just bring him back by 6, okay? We'll probably be sitting down to eat around then. 6 o'clock. Just in time for me to drop him off and disappear before the real family saw me. Danny came running down the stairs, backpack slung over his shoulder and his face bright with excitement. Grandma Maggie, I got the coolest robot for Christmas. Want to see? For the next 3 hours, we built robot armies in my small living room. Watched a Christmas movie I'd recorded just for him, and ate grilled cheese sandwiches cut into triangles the way he liked them. Normal grandmother things, the kind of simple time together that used to be taken for granted. Grandma Maggie, he said during the movie, why didn't you come to Christmas dinner? The question I'd been dreading. Well, sweetheart, sometimes families need to keep things small. But your family too. Yes, I am. I pulled him closer on the couch. And nothing will ever change that. Promise? Promise. At 5:45, I drove him back to Kevin's house. The driveway was full of expensive cars, warm light spilling from every window. Through the front window, I could see the dining room table set for 12, candles lit, everyone already gathering for their perfect family dinner. Kevin came out to get Danny, hovering by my car like he was afraid I might try to come inside. Thanks, Mom. He had a good time. We always do. I kissed Danny goodbye through the car window, watching as Kevin hurried him toward the house full of people who mattered more than I did. I was halfway home when my phone rang. Unknown number, but something made me answer. Is this Margaret Sullivan? Yes. This is Dr. Martinez at Greenwich Hospital. Your grandson Danny was brought in about 20 minutes ago. He's stable, but there's been an accident. The world tilted sideways. What kind of accident? He fell through ice into a lake, near drowning, possible hypothermia. His father listed you as an emergency contact. I was already turning the car around. I'm on my way. The drive back to Greenwich passed in a blur of panic and rage. Danny had fallen through ice. After I'd specifically taught him never to trust frozen lakes. After he'd been smart enough to stay away from the ice just last night. How had this happened? I found Kevin in the hospital waiting room, still in his Christmas dinner clothes, his face gray with shock. Brittany was there too, along with her parents and what looked like half the dinner party guests. Kevin, I grabbed his arm. What happened? The kids were playing outside after dinner. Danny and his cousins went down to the lake and... His voice broke. The ice gave way. He went under. Where were the adults? Inside. We thought they were just throwing snowballs or something. I looked at Brittany, who was crying prettily into a tissue while her mother rubbed her back. You let 8-year-old children play unsupervised near a frozen lake? It wasn't supposed to be dangerous, Brittany said defensively. The ice has been solid for weeks. Ice is never solid enough for children to play on unattended. Don't you think we feel bad enough? Richard Harrington stepped forward, his voice cold. This is hardly the time for blame. Isn't it? I turned back to Kevin. How did he get out? One of the other kids ran for help. By the time we got there, Kevin's hands were shaking. He was underwater. Victoria dove in and pulled him out. Victoria Harrington. The woman who'd made it clear all evening that I wasn't fit to breathe the same air as her precious family. She'd saved my grandson's life while I was home alone, eating leftover Chinese food and feeling sorry for myself. Where is he now? ICU. They're warming him up slowly, checking for brain damage from oxygen deprivation. Brain damage. The words hit me like a physical blow. Mrs. Sullivan? A doctor appeared at my elbow. You're Danny's grandmother? Yes. He's asking for you. As I followed the doctor down the sterile hospital corridor, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 2 years. Frank Sullivan. Frank, it's Maggie. My voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. Do what you have to do. What's wrong? They almost killed my grandson. A pause. Then, I'll be there in the morning. And that's when the real story began. Danny looked so small in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped softly in the quiet ICU room. His lips were still faintly blue, and his breathing was shallow, but his eyes opened when I walked in. "Grandma Maggie," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the lake water he'd swallowed. "I'm here, sweetheart." I took his hand, careful not to disturb the IV line. "How are you feeling?" "Cold and scared. The doctors say you're going to be just fine." I smoothed his hair back from his forehead, noting how much warmer his skin felt than when I'd first arrived. "You're a brave boy. I remembered what you said about ice. I didn't want to go on the lake, but Brandon said I was being a baby." My heart clenched. "What happened, Danny?" "Brandon and Tyler pushed me. They said I was too chicken to walk on the ice like a real boy." His eyes filled with tears. "They laughed when I fell through. They pushed him. This wasn't an accident. It was bullying that had turned into a near tragedy, and when I thought about Brittany's family laughing it off, calling it boys being boys, my vision went red." "Did you tell your dad what really happened?" Danny shook his head. "Brandon said if I told, they'd make sure I never got invited to family stuff again. He said his mom already thinks I don't belong. 8 years old, and he was already being trained to accept abuse, to earn his place in a family that didn't want him anyway. The same way I'd been trained to smile and stay quiet while they slowly erased me from their lives. Danny, listen to me." I leaned closer, making sure he was looking directly at me. "What those boys did was wrong. Very wrong. And no one gets to hurt you and then tell you to keep quiet about it. But what if they're right? What if I really don't belong? You belong wherever people love you for who you are, not what you can do for them." I squeezed his hand gently. "And you are loved, sweetheart. So much." A nurse came in to check his vitals, and I stepped out into the hallway to think. Through the waiting room window, I could see the Harrington family still holding court, playing the role of concerned relatives for the hospital staff and any other witnesses. Kevin sat apart from them, his face buried in his hands. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Just landed at LaGuardia. See you in an hour. F. Frank." My older brother, the one who'd left Queens 40 years ago and never looked back. The one who'd built something impressive out of nothing, though he'd never told me exactly what that something was. We'd grown apart over the years. Different worlds, different priorities. But family was family when it mattered. I'd called Frank because I needed someone who understood that money and power were just tools, and sometimes those tools were necessary to protect the people you loved. Someone who wouldn't tell me to turn the other cheek or make peace for the sake of family harmony. Someone who wouldn't let them get away with what they'd done. "Maggie?" Kevin appeared beside me, looking exhausted. "The doctor says Danny can go home tomorrow if his tests stay normal." "Good, that's good. I wanted to thank you for coming so quickly. I know today was complicated. Complicated. What a nice way to describe being excluded from Christmas dinner and then called in like hired help when tragedy struck. "Kevin, we need to talk about what really happened." "What do you mean?" "It was an accident. Danny told me his cousins pushed him onto the ice, that they were bullying him." Kevin's face went pale. "He said that?" "He also said Brandon threatened him about telling the truth, said Brittany's family already thinks he doesn't belong." Kevin looked back toward the waiting room, where Brittany was dabbing her eyes with a tissue while her father spoke in low, serious tones to what looked like a hospital administrator. "Mom, I know the family dynamics are difficult, but accusing Brandon of pushing Danny, that's a serious allegation. Is it more serious than a child nearly drowning? Of course not, but if we start throwing around accusations, we might upset the people who already don't want us around anyway." Kevin winced. "It's not that simple." "It is exactly that simple." I kept my voice low, but every word was steel. "Your son was pushed into a frozen lake by children who've been taught that he's beneath them, and you're worried about making accusations. What do you want me to do, Mom? Blow up my marriage over something we can't prove?" Before I could answer, a commotion erupted in the waiting room. Security guards were escorting a man in an expensive overcoat through the double doors, ignoring the protests of the hospital staff who were trying to explain visiting hour restrictions. Frank Sullivan might be pushing 70, but he still commanded attention when he walked into a room. Silver hair, perfectly tailored suit, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can buy and sell most of the people around you. "Which one of you is Harrington?" he asked the assembled family, his voice carrying easily across the room. Richard stepped forward, puffing up with his usual self-importance. "I'm Richard Harrington. And you are? Frank Sullivan, Danny's great-uncle. Frank's eyes swept the room, taking in every face, cataloging every detail. We need to talk. I'm sorry, but this is a private family matter, Victoria interjected. Perhaps you could call tomorrow, when emotions aren't running so high. Frank turned to look at her, and something in his expression made her take a step back. Lady, my nephew nearly died on your property while your grandchildren bullied him. The only thing private about this situation is the conversation we're going to have about how you're going to make this right. Now see here, Richard started, but Frank cut him off with a gesture. You've got two choices. We can handle this quietly, like civilized people, or we can handle it through lawyers and investigators and the kind of public attention that makes people ask uncomfortable questions about family dynamics and child supervision. Frank's smile was pleasant and absolutely terrifying. What's it going to be? That's when I realized my brother hadn't just built something successful over the past 40 years. He'd built something powerful, and the Harringtons were about to find out exactly what that meant. Within 24 hours of Frank's arrival, Richard Harrington's investment firm was under investigation by the SEC. Funny how quickly karma works when you know the right people. I was sitting in Danny's hospital room the next morning when Kevin burst in, his face flushed with panic. Mom, what did you do? Good morning to you too, sweetheart. I looked up from the crossword puzzle I'd been working on while Danny slept. Did you bring the orange juice Danny asked for? Federal investigators showed up at Richard's office this morning. They're seizing files, freezing accounts, the whole 9 yards. Kevin's voice cracked with stress. Brittany is hysterical. She thinks you called them. Why would she think that? I asked innocently, though we both knew exactly why. Frank hadn't wasted any time making his point. Did you ask your brother-in-law if there's anything they should be investigating? This isn't funny, Mom. If Richard goes down, it affects everyone, including Danny's college fund. Ah, yes, the college fund. The one Brittany had mentioned several times as Danny's ticket to the right schools, the right connections, the right life. Amazing how money that was supposedly for Danny's future always seemed to come with strings attached to the Harrington family name. Kevin, I said gently, sit down. He remained standing, pacing actually, like a caged animal. I can't sit down. My wife's family is being destroyed, and I need to know if you're responsible. Your wife's family pushed your son into a frozen lake and laughed about it. It was an accident. Was it? I folded the newspaper carefully, taking my time, because Danny told me a very different story. Would you like to hear it? Kevin's pacing stopped. For the first time since he'd rushed into the room, he actually looked at his son lying in the hospital bed. Danny's color was better this morning, but he was still connected to monitors, still recovering from hypothermia and near drowning. What did he say? That Brandon and Tyler pushed him onto the ice, that they called him names and told him he was too chicken to walk on the lake like a real boy, that when he fell through, they laughed. I stood up, moving closer to Kevin. That Brandon threatened him about telling the truth, said his mother already thinks he doesn't belong. Kevin sank into the chair like someone had cut his strings. Jesus! Your son was bullied and nearly died because of it, and your first concern is protecting the people who bullied him. That's not... Kevin started, then stopped, because we both knew it was exactly that. Kevin, I need you to understand something. I sat down across from him, making sure he was looking directly at me. For 2 years, I've watched you choose Brittany's comfort over Danny's well-being. I've watched you exclude me from family events, minimize my relationship with my grandson, and turn me into a convenient babysitter who disappears when the important people show up. Mom, I'm not finished. My voice stayed calm, but there was steel underneath. I've bitten my tongue through countless humiliations because I thought keeping the peace was more important than my dignity. But when they hurt Danny, when they nearly killed him and then tried to cover it up, that was the line. So you called Uncle Frank? The uncle I haven't seen in 15 years? I called the one person I knew who wouldn't tell me to forgive and forget. What did you tell him? Before I could answer, Frank himself appeared in the doorway. He'd traded yesterday's overcoat for a more casual look. Khakis and a sweater that probably cost more than Kevin made in a week, but approachable enough for a hospital visit. Morning, nephew. Frank's smile was warm, genuinely affectionate. How's our boy doing? Uncle Frank. Kevin stood up awkwardly, like a teenager caught doing something wrong. I didn't know you were still in town. Wouldn't leave without making sure Danny's okay. Frank moved to the bedside, studying the monitors with the sharp attention of someone who'd spent time in hospitals before. Kids are resilient. He'll bounce back. Frank, Kevin said carefully, there's something I need to ask you. Ask away. Did you have anything to do with what's happening to Richard's business? Frank turned from the monitors to look at Kevin directly. Son, I've been doing business in New York for 40 years. When someone hurts my family, I make phone calls. Sometimes those phone calls lead to other people making phone calls. Sometimes those phone calls lead to people asking questions that should have been asked a long time ago. So you did call the SEC. I called some friends who care about financial crimes. What they chose to do with the information I shared is their business. Frank's expression hardened slightly. But let me ask you something, Kevin. When your son told you his cousins pushed him into that lake, what did you do about it? Kevin's face flushed. It's complicated. No, it's not. Someone hurt your child. You either protect him or you don't. There's no middle ground. You don't understand the situation. I understand perfectly. Frank moved closer to Kevin, and suddenly the room felt smaller. You married into money, and you're afraid that standing up for your son will cost you access to that money. You've confused being accepted by your wife's family with being loved by them. The words hit Kevin like a slap. That's not fair. Fair? Frank's voice was quiet. Dangerous. You want to talk about fair? How about a 67-year-old woman spending Christmas alone because her son is too worried about offending his in-laws to include his own mother? How about an 8-year-old boy learning to be ashamed of his grandmother because she doesn't drive the right car or wear the right clothes? You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know what it looks like when people mistake money for worth, when they think their zip code makes them better than everyone else. Frank's eyes glittered with something that might have been anger or might have been satisfaction. And I know what happens when those people discover that money only protects you if you've earned it honestly. What's that supposed to mean? It means your father-in-law has been running a Ponzi scheme for the better part of a decade. It means he's stolen money from pension funds and charity organizations to maintain his family's lifestyle. It means when the investigation is over, the Harrington name won't be worth the paper it's printed on. Kevin went white. That's impossible. Richard's firm manages billions, other people's billions, which he's been spending on houses and cars and private school tuitions. Frank shrugged. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. Grandpa Frank? Danny's voice was small, drowsy. You're here. Frank's entire demeanor shifted, the hard edges melting away as he turned to his great-nephew. Hey there, kiddo. How are you feeling? Better, warmer. Danny struggled to sit up, and Frank helped him adjust his pillows. Dad looks upset. Your dad's just worried about you, Frank said gently. Adults worry about a lot of things that don't really matter. Are you going to stay for a while? As long as you need me to. Danny smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from him since the accident. And Kevin, watching his son's face light up at his uncle's attention, finally began to understand what he'd been too afraid to see. Some things mattered more than money. By the third day, the story had hit the local news. Prominent Greenwich investment firm under federal investigation. Brittany's world was crumbling in real time, and she was taking it about as well as you'd expect from someone who'd never faced consequences before. I was in Danny's room when she arrived, her designer clothes replaced by yoga pants and a sweatshirt that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her eyes were red-rimmed and wild, the perfect composure finally cracked. This is your fault, she said without preamble, pointing an accusatory finger at me. You called your brother, and now everything is ruined. Brittany, Kevin warned from his position beside Danny's bed. Not here. Yes, here. She whirled on him. Do you understand what's happening? My father could go to prison. My family's reputation is destroyed. Danny's trust fund is gone. Our house might be seized as an asset. Danny's trust fund? I asked mildly. The one funded by stolen money? Allegedly stolen, she snapped. And even if it's true, that doesn't give you the right to destroy our lives. I didn't destroy anything. Brittany, I just stopped pretending not to see what was already there. You vindictive old witch, you never liked me, never gave me a chance. I gave you 5 years of chances. I kept my voice level, though inside I was seething. I smiled when you excluded me from family photos. I said nothing when you relegated me to babysitting duty while treating me like hired help. I bit my tongue when you taught my grandson to be ashamed of his own family. I never taught him that. You taught him that love comes with conditions, that acceptance depends on having the right clothes, the right connections, the right amount of money in the bank. I gestured toward Danny, who was watching this confrontation with wide eyes. Look at him, Brittany. Really look at him. Do you see fear in his face? She glanced at Danny, then quickly away. Because yes, there was fear there. The kind of fear children develop when they live in households where anger explodes without warning, where security depends on keeping the wrong people happy. Mom's just upset, Kevin said quietly to Danny. Everything's going to be okay. Is it? Brittany laughed, a bitter sound with no humor in it. Kevin, my father is facing 30 years in federal prison. The house we can't afford without family help is going to be repossessed. Danny's private school tuition for next year? Gone. The life we've built together? Finished. The life you built on stolen money, I corrected. The life we built together, she repeated, ignoring me completely. And now it's all gone because she couldn't mind her own business. Danny almost died, Kevin said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. Our son nearly drowned because your family's children bullied him onto thin ice. It was an accident. No, it wasn't. Kevin stood up, moving closer to his wife. I talked to Brandon yesterday, Brittany. Really talked to him. Without you or your parents coaching him, he told me exactly what happened. The color drained from Brittany's face. What did he say? That he and Tyler pushed Danny onto the ice because they wanted to see if he was brave enough to be part of the family. That when he fell through, they thought it was funny until they realized he wasn't coming back up. Children say things when they're scared. He also told me that your mother coached him to say it was an accident. That she told him if anyone asked, Danny slipped while they were throwing snowballs. Silence filled the room like a toxic gas. Danny had gone very still in his hospital bed, his eyes moving between his parents as the truth finally came to light. Brittany, I said gently, sit down. I don't want to sit down. Sit down anyway. Something in my tone made her comply, sinking into the chair by the window. How long have you known about your father's business? What? The Ponzi scheme. The stolen money. How long have you known? Her face crumpled. I didn't know. Not exactly. I mean, I knew there were irregularities, questions from investors, but Daddy said it was just bureaucratic nonsense, regulatory harassment. When did you first suspect? Last year, maybe 2 years ago. The accountant started asking questions about certain transactions, and Daddy had to find a new firm. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But I hoped you could keep living the lifestyle without asking too many questions about where the money came from. Yes, the word came out like a confession. Broken and ashamed. And Kevin? Did you tell him about your suspicions? No, I couldn't. If he knew, he might have made me choose between his family and mine. So you chose for him. You chose to protect your father's crimes over your husband's right to know he was benefiting from stolen money. It wasn't supposed to go on this long. Daddy said he could fix it, make the books balance again, by stealing more money from more victims. Brittany broke then, sobbing into her hands like the child she'd never really stopped being. A 32-year-old woman who'd built her entire identity around Daddy's money and social status, and now both were gone. I'm sorry, she cried. I'm so sorry about Danny, about excluding you, about all of it. I was scared of losing everything, and I thought if I could just maintain the right image. You thought you could make your shame disappear by passing it down to the next generation, I said. You thought if Danny learned to be embarrassed by his background, maybe you could forget yours too. What background? I'm a Harrington. Honey, your great-grandfather was a plumber from the Bronx who got lucky in real estate. Your family's been pretending to be old money for about 40 years. Frank's voice came from the doorway, where he'd been listening to the entire conversation. It's all public record if you know where to look. Brittany stared at him in shock. That's not true. Afraid it is. Angelo Harrington, born in the Bronx in 1923, started a plumbing business that did well enough to buy some rental properties. His son Richard got fancy ideas about joining high society and built a whole mythology around the family name. Frank stepped into the room, his expression almost gentle. Nothing wrong with that, by the way. Lots of families reinvent themselves. The problem comes when you start believing your own mythology. You're lying. Bank records don't lie, sweetheart. Neither do immigration documents or birth certificates. Brittany looked around the room, at Kevin's stunned face, at Danny's confused expression, at me, sitting calmly in my chair. Everyone knew? I suspected, I admitted. Real old money doesn't need to work so hard to prove itself. So what happens now? She asked, her voice small and lost. Frank answered before I could. Now you learn what it means to build a life based on something other than your father's money. Now you figure out whether your marriage is strong enough to survive without the trust fund safety net. Now you decide what kind of mother you want to be to that boy. He gestured toward Danny, who had been quietly absorbing every word of this adult conversation. And most importantly, Frank continued, now you learn to apologize properly, not just for getting caught, but for the choices you made that led to this moment. Brittany looked at Danny, then at me. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed to see us as actual people, rather than inconvenient relatives. I don't know how to do that, she whispered. Lucky for you, I said. You've got time to learn. Kevin asked for a divorce 3 days later. Not because of the money, though finding out your lifestyle was funded by pension fraud certainly didn't help, but because of what Brittany had said when he confronted her about coaching Brandon to lie. She told me it was more important to protect the family reputation than to get justice for Danny, Kevin told me as we sat in the hospital cafeteria, picking at sandwiches neither of us wanted to eat. When I asked her what kind of message that sent to our son, she said Danny needed to learn that family loyalty sometimes requires difficult choices. Family loyalty. The same phrase I'd heard my entire life, used to justify every cruelty and excuse, every betrayal. The sacred obligation that somehow only ever flowed in one direction. "How's Danny handling it?" I asked. "Better than I expected, honestly. I think he's relieved that someone finally believes him about what happened at the lake." Kevin rubbed his face with both hands. "He asked me yesterday if he was going to have to keep pretending to like Brandon." "What did you tell him?" "That he never has to pretend anything for anyone else's comfort ever again." Smart answer. Maybe Kevin was finally learning that protecting your child means more than just providing financial security. "Where will you live?" I asked gently. "Danny and I will stay in the house until it gets repossessed, then we'll figure something out. Brittany's moving back in with her parents, assuming they don't end up in prison." Kevin's laugh was bitter. Amazing how quickly everything can change. "Not everything. You're still Danny's father. I'm still his grandmother. That doesn't change based on zip codes or bank balances." "I know. And Mom, I owe you an apology. A big one." I waited, letting him find his words. "I was so desperate to give Danny the life I never had, the connections, the opportunities, the financial security, that I forgot the most important thing you gave me." "Which was?" "Unconditional love. The kind that doesn't come with strings or conditions or requirements to be someone I'm not." Kevin's eyes filled with tears. "I almost lost that for both of us." "But you didn't," I said firmly. "Mistakes can be forgiven, Kevin. What matters is what you do next. I want to do better. For Danny, for you, for myself." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Will you help me figure out how?" Before I could answer, Frank appeared at our table with a cup of coffee and a manila folder thick with documents. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, already pulling out a chair. "We need to talk about what happens next." "More bad news?" Kevin asked wearily. "Actually, some good news mixed in with the complicated stuff." Frank opened the folder and pulled out several official-looking papers. First, Richard Harrington's plea hearing is set for next month. His attorney thinks he'll get 8 to 10 years if he cooperates fully with the investigation. What about restitution for the victims? That's where it gets interesting. Frank's smile had a predatory edge. Turns out Richard was sloppy about separating his personal assets from the business. The house, the cars, the country club memberships, all purchased with stolen money, which means they're all subject to seizure. "Including Danny's trust fund," Kevin said. "Including the trust fund. But here's the thing. The court has to determine which assets were legitimately earned versus which came from illegal activities. That process could take years, and in the meantime, certain family members might find themselves in difficult financial situations." Kevin frowned. "What are you getting at, Uncle Frank?" Frank pulled out another document. "I've been thinking about investing in some real estate. Small development projects, affordable housing, that sort of thing. I'll need a good construction manager, someone I can trust to oversee the work. Construction management isn't exactly my specialty." "You'd learn. The salary would be substantial. Enough to keep Danny in a good school district, maintain health insurance, maybe even save for college." Frank's expression grew serious. "The job comes with one non-negotiable requirement, which is complete honesty about everything. No more convenient omissions, no more choosing comfort over truth. If you're going to work for me, I need to know you'll always put family first. Real family. Not the kind you buy with social connections." Kevin stared at the contract Frank had slid across the table. "Why would you do this for me?" "Because 40 years ago, I made the mistake of letting success drive a wedge between me and the people who mattered most. I've got more money than I can spend in 3 lifetimes, but I've got no children of my own, no legacy except buildings and bank accounts." Frank's voice softened. "Your mother never stopped believing in family, even when family failed her. Maybe it's time I remembered what that looks like." "What about Brittany? What about her? If I take this job, if Danny and I start over, what happens to her?" Frank shrugged. "That's her choice to make. She can figure out how to rebuild her life based on something other than Daddy's money, or she can spend the next 10 years visiting him in federal prison and feeling sorry for herself. She's still Danny's mother. Yes, she is. And if she wants to be part of his life moving forward, she'll have to earn that privilege the same way everyone else does, by putting his needs ahead of her own comfort." Kevin read through the contract slowly, and I could see him processing not just the financial details, but the larger implications. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to rebuild his entire value system from the ground up. "There's one more thing," Frank said, pulling out a final document. I've been looking into private schools in Danny's new district. Found one that's specifically designed for kids who've experienced trauma or family disruption. Smaller classes, counselors on staff, emphasis on character development rather than social status. How much does it cost? Already covered as part of your compensation package, along with health insurance, dental, and a college fund that nobody can touch except Danny when he turns 18. Kevin's hands were shaking as he signed the contract. I don't know how to thank you. Thank me by being the father Danny deserves and the son your mother raised you to be. Frank gathered up the papers and stood. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with some attorneys about certain property seizures. Seems the Harrington estate might be available for purchase at a very reasonable price. After Frank left, Kevin and I sat in silence for a long moment. Mom, he said finally, what did you tell Uncle Frank about the Harringtons? When you called him that first night? I thought about that phone call, about the rage and desperation I'd felt watching Danny in the hospital bed while his bullies got to go home to their warm houses and perfect lives. I told him the truth, I said, that they almost killed my grandson and thought they could laugh it off, that they'd spent 2 years teaching him to be ashamed of his own family, that someone needed to remind them that actions have consequences, and he just decided to destroy their entire lives? Kevin, honey, Frank didn't destroy anything. He just stopped helping them hide what they'd already destroyed themselves. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The difference is, when you destroy something through your own choices, you get what you deserve. When someone else almost destroys your child, you get justice. Is that what this is? Justice? I thought about Brittany crying in Danny's hospital room, about Richard Harrington facing federal prison, about Victoria and the rest of the family learning that money couldn't buy them out of every problem. It's a start, I said. The day Richard Harrington was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, Frank bought the family estate at auction for 40 cents on the dollar. He had very specific plans for the property. He told me over dinner that evening. Plans that would benefit a lot of people who'd never had the advantages the Harringtons took for granted. You're going to turn it into low-income housing, I guessed, watching him cut his steak with the precision of someone who'd learned table manners late in life but learned them well. Close. I'm going to turn it into a community center, an affordable housing complex for single parents and their children. Daycare, after-school programs, job training, the works. Frank's smile was satisfied, the expression of a man who'd found the perfect revenge. The Harrington Family Community Center. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Frank Sullivan, you are a wicked man. I prefer poetically just, but I'll take wicked. He raised his wineglass in a mock toast. To giving people what they deserve. Speaking of which, how's Brittany adjusting to her new circumstances? About as well as you'd expect from someone who's never worked a day in her life and suddenly needs to figure out how to pay rent. Frank's expression grew serious. Though, to her credit, she did get a job at a local preschool. Teacher's aide, minimum wage, but it's honest work. And Kevin? Kevin's doing well. Really well, actually. Turns out, he's got a natural talent for project management when he's not trying to impress people who don't deserve his respect. Frank leaned back in his chair. He's also been taking Danny to counseling. Twice a week, working through everything that happened with the lake and the family dynamics. How's Danny doing with all the changes? Better than anyone expected. Kid's resilient, and he's figuring out that losing the trust fund doesn't mean losing his security. Kevin's been very clear about priorities. Danny's well-being comes first. Everything else is negotiable. It had been 6 months since the lake incident, 3 months since Richard's sentencing, and 2 months since Kevin and Danny had moved into their new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom place in a good school district. Nothing fancy, but filled with the kind of warmth their old house had never managed. Frank, I said carefully, can I ask you something? Shoot. How long have you been wealthy? Really wealthy? He laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. What gave it away? The fact that I can buy estates at auction, or the fact that federal investigators return my phone calls? Both, actually. Would you believe me if I said it started with a food truck? A food truck? Best damn sandwiches in Manhattan, 1987 to 1994. Parked outside the financial district, served lunch to all the young hotshots who thought they were going to conquer Wall Street. Frank's expression grew nostalgic. Amazing what you can learn about market trends when you're feeding traders their lunch every day. You used insider information to make investments? Nothing illegal. But when you hear the same names coming up in conversations day after day, when you see patterns in who's buying lunch and who's skipping meals because their firm's in trouble, you start to understand how the market really works. So you parlayed sandwich money into, what? Real estate first, then tech investments in the 90s, then diversified into pretty much everything. Frank shrugged, like accumulating massive wealth was a minor hobby. Turns out I had a knack for seeing opportunities other people missed. And you never told anyone in the family? Who was I going to tell? Mom and Dad were gone. You were busy raising Kevin and building your nursing career. I sent Christmas cards with beach photos and figured everyone assumed I was doing okay. More than okay. Success is relative, Maggie. For 40 years, I measured mine in profit margins and portfolio performance. Then I got a phone call from my sister telling me someone had hurt her grandson, and I realized I'd been keeping score wrong the whole time. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. Danny and Kevin painting a fence behind their new apartment building, both of them covered in white paint and laughing. That's success, Frank said quietly. A kid who's not afraid to get dirty, a father who's more concerned with his son's happiness than his social status, and a grandmother who taught them both what unconditional love looks like. Before I could respond, my own phone buzzed with a text message. Kevin, asking if I wanted to come over for dinner tomorrow night. Danny had learned to make spaghetti and wanted to show off his culinary skills. You know what I realized recently? I said, typing back my enthusiastic yes. What's that? I spent 2 years letting the Harringtons make me feel like I wasn't good enough for their family. But I was never trying to join their family. I was trying to maintain my own. And my family was always worth more than theirs, even when theirs had more money. Damn right it was. The funny thing is, losing everything was the best thing that could have happened to Kevin and Danny. Now Danny knows his father will choose him over social status every time. And Kevin remembers what it feels like to love people for who they are instead of what they can do for you. What about Brittany? Any chance of reconciliation there? I thought about that question for a long moment. She calls Danny every week, never misses his soccer games, helps Kevin with pickup and drop-off when his work schedule gets crazy. That's something. It's a start. She's learning that being a mother means more than providing designer clothes and private school tuition. And Danny's learning that love doesn't disappear when circumstances change. Think she'll ever remarry? Maybe. But if she does, it'll be because she found someone who loves her for who she is, not who her father was. I smiled, thinking about the woman Brittany was becoming without the safety net of family money. Amazing what people can accomplish when they have to rely on their own character instead of their trust fund. Frank signaled for the check, then looked at me seriously. Maggie, there's something else I need to tell you. What now? The community center I'm building on the Harrington property? I want you to run it. Frank, I'm 67 years old. I don't know anything about running community centers. You know about taking care of people. You know about what families need when they're struggling. You know about building something meaningful out of whatever resources you have available. He leaned forward. Plus, the salary comes with a very nice apartment on the property. Plenty of room for a grandmother who wants to be close to her family. I stared at him. You bought a 20-acre estate so I could live near my grandson? I bought a 20-acre estate because someone needed to put it to better use than hosting parties for people who think their zip code makes them special. The fact that it happens to be 10 minutes from Kevin and Danny's apartment is just a bonus. Frank Sullivan, you are the most manipulative, scheming, wonderful brother a woman could ask for. I'll take that as a yes to the job offer. Yes to the job offer. I raised my wine glass to match his earlier toast. To giving people what they deserve. And to family, Frank added. The kind you can't buy and can't lose, no matter how hard people try to take it away from you. As we clinked glasses, I thought about the past 6 months, the fear and anger and heartbreak, but also the discovery that some bonds are stronger than social pressure or financial manipulation. That love, real love, doesn't disappear when trust funds do. That sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to find what was missing all along. 1 year later, I stood in the main hall of the Harrington Family Community Center, watching Danny help other children plant vegetables in the new community garden. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same property where he'd nearly drowned was now the place where he was learning to help things grow. Grandma Maggie, he called out, dirt streaked across his cheek and genuine joy lighting up his face. Look how big the tomatoes are getting. Beautiful work. Sweetheart, I called back, thinking about how different he looked now. Confident, secure, unafraid to get messy or make mistakes. The anxious child who'd worried about fitting in with his cousins had been replaced by a boy who knew exactly where he belonged. Kevin appeared beside me, followed by Brittany. Their relationship remained complicated, officially divorced, but genuinely committed to co-parenting Danny well. Brittany had changed more than anyone over the past year. The entitled princess gradually replaced by a woman learning to measure her worth in something other than her father's money. How's the job at the preschool going? I asked her. Better than I expected, she admitted. Turns out I actually like working with children when I'm not trying to use them as social accessories. And the apartment? Small but sufficient. Danny likes having his own room when he stays with me, and I'm learning to cook actual meals instead of ordering from restaurants. Brittany's smile was self-deprecating but genuine. Amazing what you can accomplish when you have to rely on yourself instead of Daddy's credit cards. Any regrets? She considered the question seriously, watching Danny laugh with his new friends. About the money? About the big house and the country club lifestyle? Not really. I miss the security, but I don't miss the person I was when I had it. What do you miss? The certainty, I guess. When everything was decided for me, where to live, which schools were acceptable, who we should associate with, I never had to figure out what I actually wanted. She paused. Turns out figuring that out is harder than I expected, but also more rewarding. Frank joined our small group, carrying a clipboard and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose plans were coming together exactly as intended. How are we doing on the enrollment numbers? Kevin asked. Better than projected. We've got a waiting list for the daycare. The job training programs are at capacity, and the community garden has more families wanting plots than we have space for. Frank grinned. I'm thinking about expanding onto the back 40 acres. More housing? Senior living. Affordable apartments for older adults who want to age in community rather than isolation. Frank glanced at me meaningfully. Might be nice to have some experienced residents who understand what it means to build something from nothing. I knew what he was really asking. Whether I'd be interested in helping design programs for seniors who'd been displaced by family dynamics or financial pressures, people like myself who'd learned late in life that starting over was possible at any age. I think that's a wonderful idea, I said. Speaking of which, Brittany said quietly, there's something I need to say to all of you. We turned to look at her, and I could see her gathering courage for whatever she was about to reveal. I've been thinking about what happened that night at the lake. About the choices I made. The things I taught Danny about family loyalty and keeping secrets. Her voice was steady, but heavy with genuine remorse. I realized that I wasn't just protecting my father's reputation. I was teaching my son that love comes with conditions, that acceptance requires performance. Brittany, Kevin started, but she held up a hand. Let me finish. I want Danny to know that what happened wasn't his fault. That when adults fail to protect children, the responsibility lies with the adults, not the children. She looked directly at me. And I want him to know that real family, the kind worth having, doesn't require anyone to make themselves smaller to fit in. That means a lot, I said simply. It's not enough, though. Words aren't enough. Brittany pulled out a manila envelope, similar to the ones Frank was always carrying around. I've been working with a lawyer to establish something called the Danny Sullivan Foundation. Money from the sale of my personal assets, jewelry, art, things I could liquidate without affecting the federal investigation. A foundation for what? Anti-bullying programs in schools. Specifically focused on helping children from different socioeconomic backgrounds learn to respect each other rather than using family money as a measure of worth. Brittany's smile was shaky but determined. It's not much. Maybe enough to fund programs in a dozen schools. But it's something. Kevin stared at her in amazement. Brittany, you didn't have to. Yes, I did. I needed to do something that would help other families avoid what we went through. And I needed Danny to see that when we make mistakes, we try to fix them, rather than just apologizing and moving on. Frank took the envelope and scanned the documents inside, his expression growing impressed. This is substantial, Brittany. You're talking about giving away everything you managed to keep from the asset seizure. Everything except what I need for basic living expenses and Danny's visits. She shrugged. Turns out I don't need much when I'm not trying to maintain an image that was built on lies anyway. I watched Danny playing with his friends, oblivious to the adult conversation happening nearby, but clearly thriving in this environment where children were valued for their character rather than their connections. Then I looked at his parents, Kevin, who'd learned to choose integrity over social climbing, and Brittany, who was slowly rebuilding herself from the ground up. You know what I think? I said finally. What's that, Mom? Kevin asked. I think Danny is the luckiest boy in the world. Not because of trust funds or private schools or big houses, but because he's got a family that's finally learning what really matters. What's that? Brittany asked. That love isn't something you earn by being perfect or maintaining the right image. That family isn't about bloodlines or bank accounts. That the people worth keeping in your life are the ones who show up when things get difficult, not just when things are convenient. As if summoned by our conversation, Danny came running over, his hands full of cherry tomatoes and his face glowing with pride. Look what we picked, he announced. Mrs. Chen says we can make salad for everyone at lunch tomorrow. That sounds perfect, sweetheart, I said, accepting a slightly dirt-covered tomato and taking a bite. Tastes like success. What does success taste like? Danny asked, genuinely curious. I looked around at my complicated, imperfect, resilient family. My son, who'd learned to choose love over status. My former daughter-in-law who was building a new life based on character rather than privilege. My brother, who'd used his wealth to create opportunities for people who'd been overlooked by society. Like home, I said. Success tastes like home. Later that evening, as Frank and I sat on the porch of my apartment watching the sunset over the community garden, he asked the question I'd been expecting. Any regrets, Maggie? About calling me that night? About everything that happened afterward? I thought about the Harringtons, Richard in federal prison, Victoria struggling to rebuild her social life without the family money, Brandon and Tyler learning to navigate school without their sense of entitlement to protect them. I thought about Brittany, working minimum wage and learning to find purpose in helping others rather than impressing them. I thought about Kevin and Danny, building a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect rather than financial obligation. I thought about myself running a community center at 68 years old and discovering that starting over could mean moving forward rather than just surviving. Not one, I said finally. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to a family is losing everything that was keeping them from seeing each other clearly, even if it means some people get hurt in the process. Frank, those people were already hurting others. They just didn't care because the others weren't important enough to matter. I smiled, thinking about Danny's laughter echoing across the garden where he'd once nearly died. Sometimes justice looks like punishment, and sometimes it looks like giving people the chance to become who they were meant to be all along. And sometimes it looks like a 67-year-old woman who refuses to let anyone teach her grandson that love comes with conditions. Especially that, I agreed. The sun set behind the trees that had once been part of the Harrington estate, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear children playing, families gathering for dinner, people building community in a place that had once been designed to exclude them. It was, I thought, exactly what justice should look like. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.